The most dangerous mistake is believing you already know the person sitting in front of you. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon outside Chicago, Danielle Brooks drove along a familiar stretch of highway after finishing a long assignment. The city moved around her like any other day. Cars passed, people hurried to their destinations, and nobody noticed the woman behind the steering wheel carrying years of experience, responsibility, and a story hidden beneath an ordinary appearance. Danielle was a United States Marshal, but she rarely allowed her position to define how people saw her. She believed a badge was a responsibility, not a reason to demand attention. That was why she kept her life simple whenever she was away from official duties. She preferred conversations without titles, introductions without assumptions, and moments where people could meet her as a person first. A few miles from downtown, Danielle noticed flashing lights behind her vehicle. She calmly pulled over near the side of the road and waited. Officer James Whitmore approached with the professionalism expected during a routine traffic stop. He carried out his responsibilities, asked standard questions, and reviewed the information available to him. From his perspective, it was an ordinary encounter. A driver, a vehicle, a few questions. But what he did not know was that the person sitting quietly behind the wheel was not an ordinary driver. Danielle answered respectfully and provided everything required. She did not mention her federal position. She did not reach for special treatment. She did not use her authority to change the situation. Instead, she allowed the process to happen naturally because she believed fairness meant following the same standards as everyone else. James noticed something unusual about her calm confidence. There was a level of patience and awareness that he did not often see during stressful roadside interactions. He wondered about her background but focused on completing his responsibility. Nearby, another officer observed the interaction and quietly commented that Danielle seemed different from most people they encountered during routine stops. She was not trying to argue. She was not trying to prove anything. She simply remained composed. Inside her vehicle was a small leather folder containing documents connected to her work. Hidden among those papers was the official identification that could instantly change the entire tone of the conversation. But Danielle chose not to reveal it. Not yet. She believed people should do the right thing because it was right, not because they discovered someone had a powerful title. As the afternoon sunlight reflected across the city streets, James continued asking questions, unaware that the woman in front of him had handled some of the most challenging responsibilities in federal service. He did not know her name carried authority. He did not know her experience surpassed anything he could see. He only knew that something about this routine traffic stop felt different. And before the day was over, everyone involved would learn that appearances could hide the most important details of a person's story. The quietest moments often reveal the greatest truths, because a person's character is discovered when nobody knows their title. Officer James Whitmore continued the roadside conversation with Danielle Brooks, still believing it was a routine traffic stop. The afternoon traffic moved steadily around them, and the sounds of the city created a normal background for an encounter that would later become unforgettable. Danielle remained calm and cooperative, answering each question with patience. She understood that James was simply performing his duties based on the information available to him. She did not blame him for not knowing her background because she believed every person deserved the opportunity to act with fairness before knowing someone's importance. James reviewed the information in front of him and noticed small details that made him curious. Danielle spoke with confidence but never arrogance. She understood procedures clearly but never acted as if she was above them. Her answers were direct, respectful, and careful. It reminded James of people he had met throughout his career who carried themselves with a level of discipline that came from years of experience. Still, he could not explain why this particular interaction felt different. Danielle looked like an ordinary driver, yet everything about her communication suggested someone with extensive training. A few minutes later, another officer approached and asked James if everything was all right. James explained that the situation was under control, but he admitted that the driver seemed unusual. The other officer briefly looked at Danielle and noticed the same thing. She was not trying to avoid responsibility. She was not attempting to create conflict. She was simply waiting patiently while the process continued. Inside Danielle's vehicle, a small folder remained closed. It contained information connected to her federal assignment, but she had no intention of using it to change how she was treated. Years earlier, she had learned an important lesson from her mentors. Authority was most valuable when it was used carefully. A title could open doors, but integrity determined what happened after those doors opened. As the conversation continued, James asked Danielle about her destination. She gave a simple answer and explained that she was returning home after completing professional work nearby. She did not provide unnecessary details. She did not mention the people she worked with or the responsibilities she carried. She wanted the encounter to remain about the facts, not about who she was. James looked at the information one more time and began to wonder if he was missing something important. He could not identify what it was, but he sensed there was a larger story behind the woman sitting in front of him. Danielle noticed his curiosity but remained silent. She knew the truth would eventually become clear, but she also believed that patience revealed more than power ever could. Neither of them realized that this ordinary roadside conversation was only the beginning. Soon, the hidden details of Danielle's identity would change the way everyone remembered this moment. Sometimes the most important details are the ones people never notice. As the afternoon continued along the busy streets outside Chicago, Officer James Whitmore remained focused on completing the traffic stop. Professionally, to him, every situation required attention, patience, and careful observation. He had learned throughout his career that small details often revealed important information, and something about Danielle Brooks continued to stand out. She was calm in a way that was difficult to explain. Not because she was ignoring the situation, but because she understood it completely. Danielle knew the procedures. She understood the questions. She recognized the responsibility behind every decision being made. But she also knew that revealing her position too early would change the entire interaction. People often reacted differently when they discovered someone carried authority. Some became nervous. Others became overly respectful. Danielle wanted something much simpler. She wanted people to follow the same standards whether they knew her title or not. While James continued his review, Danielle looked out toward the passing vehicles and thought about the years that had shaped her perspective. Becoming a United States Marshal had taught her that true leadership was not about being recognized. It was about remaining steady when situations became uncertain. It was about protecting trust and making decisions based on principles rather than personal advantage. James eventually asked a few additional questions, trying to understand the situation more clearly. Danielle answered honestly but kept her responses focused. She never acted defensive, and she never tried to turn the conversation into a debate. Her approach surprised him because many people reacted differently during stressful moments. Some tried to explain everything immediately. Others searched for ways to avoid responsibility. Danielle did neither. She simply allowed the process to continue. A short distance away, the second officer continued observing. He noticed the same thing James had noticed. There was something about Danielle's confidence that did not come from pride. Came from experience. Yet neither officer could understand why. They only saw a woman sitting quietly in a vehicle. They did not see the years of federal service behind her. They did not see the responsibilities she carried. They did not see the decisions she had made in situations far more complicated than a roadside conversation. Meanwhile, Danielle's phone remained silent inside her bag. One call could reveal everything. One conversation could instantly change the way the officers viewed the situation. But Danielle chose not to make that call. She believed that respect earned through truth was more meaningful than respect created by a title. As the sun began moving lower in the sky, James reached a point where he had to decide what came next. He looked at Danielle one more time, still unaware that this ordinary encounter involved someone with extraordinary responsibilities. He believed he was simply handling a routine situation. What he did not realize was that he was standing in front of a lesson he would remember for the rest of his career. Because sometimes the person who appears to have the least power is the person carrying the greatest responsibility. The truth about a person is often hidden behind the moments when they choose silence instead of explanation. As the traffic stop continued along the quiet roadside outside Chicago, Danielle Brooks remained composed while Officer James Whitmore carefully considered the situation in front of him. The afternoon was beginning to fade, and the ordinary sounds of the city continued around them. People drove by without knowing that a simple conversation was slowly becoming a lesson about patience, responsibility, and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. James reviewed the information once more and noticed that everything Danielle had provided was clear and consistent. There was no reason to believe anything was wrong, yet he still felt that there was something unusual about her. It was not the type of feeling based on suspicion. It was the feeling that came from recognizing someone who carried themselves with experience. Danielle had a calmness that reminded him of people who had spent years handling serious responsibilities. But without knowing her background, he could only make judgments based on what he saw. Danielle understood this. She had experienced similar moments throughout her career. She knew that many people formed opinions quickly, often without realizing how much they did not know. That was why she valued patience. She believed that every person deserved the chance to reveal their character through actions, not assumptions. As James continued the process, he asked Danielle whether she had any questions. She politely said no and thanked him for handling the situation professionally. Her response surprised him because it showed appreciation rather than frustration. He expected tension, but instead he found cooperation. The second officer standing nearby quietly observed the interaction and noticed the same thing. Danielle was not trying to gain control of the conversation. She was not trying to make anyone feel uncomfortable. She was simply allowing everyone involved to do their jobs. Meanwhile, Danielle's hidden identification remained inside her bag. The official badge that represented her federal authority was only a few feet away, but she had no desire to use it as a shortcut. She believed that a person's actions mattered more than the title attached to their name. Years earlier, a mentor had once told her that the strongest leaders were not the ones who demanded recognition. They were the ones who remained respectful even when they had every reason not to. That lesson stayed with her. James eventually stepped away for a moment to discuss the situation with his partner. They talked quietly about the encounter and agreed that Danielle seemed different from most drivers they had spoken with. They did not know why, but they knew there was something they had not discovered yet. When James returned, he looked at Danielle and asked one final question. His tone was still professional, but his curiosity had grown. Danielle answered calmly, knowing that the moment of truth was getting closer. She knew her identity would eventually become clear, but she also knew that the most valuable lesson would not come from revealing her badge. It would come from what happened before anyone knew who she really was. The moment before the truth is revealed is often the moment when people show who they really are. Along the roadside outside Chicago, Danielle Brooks remained seated calmly as Officer James Whitmore completed the final steps of the interaction. The afternoon had almost passed, and what began as a simple traffic stop had become something neither person expected. James had spent years handling situations like this, but this encounter stayed in his mind because Danielle's behavior did not match the assumptions he had formed at the beginning. She was not trying to avoid responsibility. She was not searching for a way to end the conversation quickly. She was simply allowing the process to happen with patience and respect. James returned to his vehicle to review the information one more time. As he looked through the details, he noticed that everything was in order. There was nothing unusual about the documents in front of him, yet there was something about Danielle that continued to stand out. He thought about her calm answers, her professional attitude, and the way she carried herself during the entire interaction. Meanwhile, Danielle looked through the windshield and reflected on the situation. She had been in many environments where people reacted differently after learning about her profession. Some became nervous. Some immediately changed their attitude. Others treated her differently simply because of the authority connected to her position. That was exactly why she rarely introduced herself with her title. She believed people should not need to know someone's importance before choosing to act with fairness. A few moments later, James returned and continued the conversation. His approach remained professional, but there was a noticeable difference. He was no longer simply going through a routine procedure. He was trying to understand the person in front of him. Danielle noticed the change but did not comment on it. She understood that genuine respect was something that developed naturally, not something that could be forced. The second officer standing nearby received a message through the department communication system. The message was related to another matter, but it reminded everyone that situations could change quickly when additional information became available. James listened carefully and then looked back toward Danielle. He had no idea that a simple verification process would soon reveal information connected to a much larger responsibility. Inside Danielle's bag was the identification that could immediately explain everything. It carried the authority of her position as a United States Marshal. But Danielle continued to wait. She wanted the truth to appear at the right moment, not as a way to win an argument or gain special treatment. She believed that the strongest message was not showing people what power looked like. It was showing them how responsibility looked. As the conversation reached its final stage, James prepared to complete the interaction. He still did not know the full story of the woman standing before him. He did not know about her federal duties, her years of service, or the trust placed in her by the country she served. All he knew was that this was not an ordinary encounter. And soon, the information hidden in plain sight would change everything he thought he understood about that afternoon. The truth does not always arrive with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes, it appears quietly through a simple confirmation that changes the way everyone sees the moment that came before. Along the roadside outside Chicago, Officer James Whitmore stood beside his vehicle reviewing the final details of the interaction with Danielle Brooks. The afternoon sun was beginning to disappear behind the city skyline, and the routine traffic stop that started hours earlier was approaching its unexpected conclusion. James looked through the information available to him one more time. Everything appeared normal, but something about the situation still felt different. Danielle had remained respectful from the beginning. She had answered every question clearly. She had shown patience when many people would have shown frustration. The more James thought about it, the more he realized that her calmness was not accidental. It came from experience. It came from someone who understood how to remain steady when circumstances were uncertain. Meanwhile, Danielle continued waiting quietly. She knew the moment was close. She knew that once her identity became known, the entire atmosphere would change. People would no longer see only the woman sitting in a vehicle. They would see the title, the responsibility, and the authority connected to her work. But Danielle also knew that the most important part of the encounter had already happened. Before anyone knew who she was, everyone involved had shown their true character. James had followed the process. Danielle had respected the process. That mattered to her more than any introduction could. A few moments later, the department received additional information through official channels. The message required proper verification, and the officers carefully followed the necessary steps. James listened as the details were reviewed, not realizing that the information being confirmed was connected to the person standing only a few feet away. Then the words reached him. Danielle Brooks was not simply a driver returning home. She was a United States Marshal. The realization changed the atmosphere immediately. James looked back at the entire conversation from a different perspective. The quiet confidence he noticed earlier suddenly made sense. The knowledge of procedures, the patience, and the professionalism were not accidental qualities. They were the result of years of service and training. But what surprised him most was not Danielle's position. It was the fact that she never used it to influence the situation. She could have revealed her identity at any moment. She could have changed the conversation instantly. Instead, she allowed everyone to be judged by their actions, not by their assumptions about who had more authority. Danielle calmly explained that she appreciated the officers doing their jobs. She did not want the moment to become about embarrassment or blame. She wanted it to become a reminder that every person deserved to be treated with fairness before their background was known. James listened carefully. For the first time that afternoon, he understood that the most important lesson was not about discovering a hidden badge. It was about recognizing the value of treating every individual with dignity from the beginning. Because sometimes the person you think you are evaluating is actually the person teaching you the lesson you needed to learn. The most powerful lessons are not always the ones spoken in public. Sometimes they happen in quiet conversations where people finally see each other clearly. After Danielle Brooks' identity was confirmed, the roadside that once felt like an ordinary place became the setting for a moment of reflection. Officer James Whitmore stood there realizing that the person he had been trying to understand was someone who had already spent years understanding people like him. Danielle did not look at the situation as a victory. She did not see herself as someone who had proven a point. Instead, she saw it as an opportunity to remind everyone that respect should exist before recognition. James carefully chose his words as he apologized for any assumptions he may have made during the interaction. His voice was sincere because he understood that the lesson was not about one traffic stop. It was about the importance of seeing people beyond the first impression. Danielle listened and accepted his apology with the same calm attitude she had shown from the beginning. She told him that she appreciated his willingness to reflect because growth came from moments when people were honest with themselves. She did not want him to leave the situation feeling defeated. She wanted him to leave understanding that every person carried a story that might never be visible at first glance. The second officer nearby also reflected on what had happened. He realized that Danielle's behavior had revealed something important. She had every reason to mention her position immediately, yet she chose patience instead. She allowed the process to continue because she believed fairness mattered more than convenience. James thought about the years he had spent serving the city. He had always believed that being a good officer meant knowing the rules and following procedures. After meeting Danielle, he understood that responsibility also included listening carefully and recognizing the humanity of every person involved. The conversation continued for several more minutes, but the focus was no longer on the traffic stop. It became a discussion about perspective, professionalism, and the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. Danielle explained that a position of authority should never create distance between people. It should create a stronger commitment to fairness. Before leaving, James thanked Danielle for the way she handled the situation. He admitted that the encounter would stay with him because it challenged him to think differently about his daily work. Danielle smiled and reminded him that every day offered another opportunity to make better choices. As she prepared to leave, the officers watched her drive away, still processing everything that had happened. They expected to remember the moment because of her title. Instead, they remembered it because of her character. The hidden badge was never the most important part of the story. The most important part was the person behind it. Because true authority is not measured by how quickly people recognize your power. It is measured by how you treat others before they know you have it. The impact of a single moment is not always measured by what happens immediately afterward. Sometimes the greatest changes appear quietly over time, through the choices people make when nobody is watching. In the weeks following the roadside encounter, Officer James Whitmore continued thinking about Danielle Brooks and the lesson he had learned that afternoon. His daily responsibilities remained the same, but his perspective had changed. He began paying closer attention to the people he met, remembering that every interaction involved a person with a unique background and personal journey. Before that day, James believed that experience meant recognizing situations quickly. After meeting Danielle, he understood that experience also meant knowing when to slow down and listen. He started sharing the story with younger officers during training conversations, not as a story about a mistake, but as a reminder about the importance of professionalism and awareness. He explained that a badge represented responsibility, not superiority. The strongest public servants were not the ones who demanded respect. They were the ones who showed respect first. Meanwhile, Danielle Brooks returned to her work as a United States Marshal. She continued handling her responsibilities with the same discipline and humility she had always shown. The attention from the unexpected encounter did not change how she approached her career. She still believed that authority was something to carry carefully, not something to display. Her colleagues noticed that she often used the experience as an example when discussing leadership. She explained that people should not need to know someone's title before treating them with dignity. That principle applied everywhere, from professional environments to simple everyday interactions. Captain Robert Hayes later learned about the encounter and spoke with both James and Danielle. He recognized that the situation represented something larger than a routine roadside conversation. It showed how important it was for people in positions of responsibility to remain open-minded and thoughtful. He encouraged his team to remember that every person they encountered had a story beyond what could be seen in a few minutes. Over time, the story reached members of the community as well. Many people connected with the message because they had experienced moments when others judged them before knowing the full truth. They understood that assumptions could create distance, while understanding could create connection. Danielle never wanted the focus to remain on her position. She wanted people to remember the deeper lesson. A person's value was never determined by their appearance, their circumstances, or the assumptions of others. It was determined by their actions, their character, and the way they treated those around them. Months later, James and Danielle crossed paths again at a community event focused on public service and trust. They greeted each other with genuine respect, knowing that their unexpected meeting had changed the way they both viewed their responsibilities. They did not remember the day because of the confusion that started it. They remembered it because of the understanding that followed. Because sometimes the most important encounters are not the ones where people discover someone's power. They are the ones where people discover each other's humanity. Years after the unexpected roadside encounter, Danielle Brooks and Officer James Whitmore carried the memory of that day in different ways, but both understood that it represented something much bigger than a simple conversation between a driver and a police officer. Time had moved forward, responsibilities had changed, and new challenges had appeared, yet the lesson remained clear. The most important moments in life are often the ones that reveal who people truly are when there is nothing to gain and no reason to pretend. Danielle continued serving as a United States Marshal with the same quiet dedication that had guided her throughout her career. She handled important responsibilities, worked with different communities, and continued believing that trust was built through actions rather than titles. Even after people learned about her position, she never wanted attention because of her badge. She wanted people to remember the values behind it. For Danielle, authority was never about being recognized. It was about protecting fairness, showing patience, and understanding that every person deserved dignity. Officer James Whitmore also continued his work, but the way he approached his role had changed. The roadside encounter became a personal reminder that every person carried a story that could not be discovered immediately. He became more thoughtful in his conversations, more patient in difficult moments, and more aware that first impressions rarely showed the complete picture. He often shared the lesson with others, explaining that professionalism was not only about knowing procedures. It was also about knowing when to listen. Months later, Danielle and James met again during a community event focused on strengthening trust between residents and law enforcement. The meeting was simple, without cameras, announcements, or public attention. They greeted each other with respect because both understood the significance of their shared experience. James thanked Danielle for the way she handled that afternoon, but she reminded him that the lesson belonged to everyone involved. She explained that growth did not come from being perfect. It came from being willing to recognize a moment, learn from it, and become better afterward. As the event continued, people from different backgrounds shared their own experiences of being misunderstood. Some spoke about moments when others judged them before knowing their full story. Others talked about the importance of giving people a chance to show their character. Danielle listened carefully because she knew those conversations mattered. She believed communities became stronger when people chose curiosity over assumptions and compassion over quick conclusions. Looking back, neither Danielle nor James remembered the encounter because of a misunderstanding. They remembered it because it created a lasting change in the way they saw the world. One person learned that authority should always be carried with humility. Another learned that every individual deserved patience before judgment. And everyone who heard the story discovered the same powerful truth. A person's greatest value is not found in what others assume about them, but in the character they reveal through their actions. Because the strongest kind of authority is not the power to make people notice you. It is the ability to make people feel respected, even before they know who you are.